I'm going to show you some keyboard shortcuts today in an application we've been using for a couple of days called Kleki. In Google Classroom, scroll down to the third assignment called Digital Color Page AlphaZen Handlebit. Go to the instructions and then click on the Google Drive folder for your class period. Each period has their own folders on My Google Drive. Find the one with your name on it and preview it. Once you see the preview, go over here to the side and download it to your computer. Your Chromebooks should automatically save your files into your downloads folder. If you're on a laptop other than your Chromebook, you have to save it the way I'm showing here. And if you've saved it before, when you click Save, it'll ask you if you want to replace it. Say yes. Then close this window and open up the Kleki application. This is a website that allows you to paint in layers. So I'm going to walk you through the process of opening the file that you've just downloaded. That's the scan. Go over here to the right-hand side and click on File and select Import. Click on your Downloads folder, select the file, and open it. This is telling you that this file is too large, so it's going to downsize it to this size here. Make sure to always select as image. Otherwise, it will crop the image to this area here as a layer. Once it's in here, it's a very large image, so we're going to downsize it, and here's how you do that. Next to this tab in this palette, click on the Edit tab and select Resize. Select the height and change it to 1000 pixels. If you tap the Tab key, you'll notice this one change automatically. This number may vary depending on how I cropped your image when I uploaded it. So click OK, and it's immediately going to reduce the size of the image. This will take up less hard drive space on your Chromebook. The next thing I'm going to do is click on the Layers tab and create a new layer by clicking this plus. It automatically labels it Layer 2. In order to change that, I'm going to double click on it and type in the word color and select Rename. The other thing I'm going to do is where it says blending, I'm going to switch from normal to darken. What that will do is that'll enable us to paint right over the top of this and still see what's in the background. I'm going to create another layer, double click, and I'm going to call this one Ink and rename. We're going to leave the blending to normal on this layer. One of the key things that you have to always remember to do is to only paint on the color layer and on the ink layer. Leave this layer alone down here. With this selected, I've got the brush tool selected. I'm going to click on the brush here and it's going to bring up this palette. I'm just going to arbitrarily select the color red and I'm just going to start painting. The brush is really small, and in order to fill up this area quickly, I can come over here and change the size of the brush so that it's a much larger brush now. Notice how it's painting right over the top, but leaving that black on the bottom alone. That's because, again, our layer is set to darken. So So you don't have to be super careful, but you want to be as careful as you can when you're coloring your various layers. This brush is too big to fit into some of these places, so I'm going to pinch the screen open to zoom in here with 2 fingers. Click on the brush tool and reduce the brush size to try and fit it in here better. As you're painting along, one of the best keyboard shortcuts to remember, rather than having to drive or put your cursor over here and change the size of the cursor, the keyboard shortcut is the right and left bracket tool. The right and left bracket tools, or keys, are on your keyboard. And if I hit the right bracket key, it makes the brush larger. If I hit the left one, it makes it smaller, and I can get into some of these really tight spaces. Another keyboard shortcut that's very good to know is to move the frame around by holding the space bar and clicking and dragging the view. I'm going to make the brush a little bit bigger so that I can quickly fill in some of these areas. If you make a mistake, like I did here where I overlapped, you can select the eraser tool over here. Reduce it down. I'm using the left bracket. And I can erase around that area where I went too far past the line. Notice that when I put my cursor over here, without clicking it, that it says eraser, and then in brackets it says the letter E. That's another keyboard shortcut. For the brush tool or the pen tool, it's actually the letter B. Here's how that works together. I've got the brush tool selected, or the pen tool selected. And if I make a mistake, I can zoom in, tap the letter E for the eraser tool, and notice how the size changes. The brush tool and the eraser tool have their own settings. So you can see how keyboard shortcuts will come in very handy when you're zooming in and out, when you're changing from the brush tool to paint, to the eraser tool to erase. This way you can just go back and forth very quickly and make for some very clean lines. I'm going to hold the space bar down and move over here. I've got the brush tool selected. I'm hitting the left bracket key on my keyboard to get this brush much smaller, to get in this tight space down here. Space bar, move it up here, tap the letter E for the eraser, and erase this area here. I'm not super concerned about how close to this black line is, because on the next layer, on the ink layer, we're going to paint right over the top of that. And here's how you're going to do that. Click on the layer, select the ink layer, click on the brush tool. I'm going to choose a blue color for this one, and I want it very bright. So I can move this around. And on this layer, we've got the setting for the blending to normal. What I want to do is, I want this brush to be really small so that I can paint the leaves this blue color. It's going to make for almost a neon colored painting. So I'm just carefully going over the leaves. And I'm using the mouse on this, but you can use your finger, or you can use a stylus, or you can use any number of other tools on here that suits your need. What we're also going to do is you can use the paint bucket tool to paint all of the colors of those areas that are connected like this. So the paint bucket tool comes in really handy also. Anytime you see things like this, these little dots in here that are left over are called artifacts. So in order to paint over the artifacts to make it a solid blue, I've just switched over to the brush tool. One other tool that comes in very handy, or one technique I should say, is you can do what's called a point-to-point line. And the way that works is, I'm going to click down here, and then I'm going to hold the Shift key down and click up to here, and notice how it went point to point. As long as your lines are fairly straight, you can do point to point like this all the way around. And you can fill in areas fairly quickly with this. I'm just making this line very thick, holding the Shift key down so that I can go point to point and fill in these areas without having to be super careful about it. So you can see how that tool is going to come in very handy. What we're going to eventually do on this picture is we're going to turn this in with just those two layers showing. So you can see I've got a lot of work to do here. So when this image is completed, both of these layers are going to be filled with paint. This one will be turned off. And then we'll turn in the Photoshop file and also the PNG file. This is probably the most important thing that I want to show you right now. When you save your work, select the file format as PSD. While you're working on this file, you want to save it as a PSD file so that it saves the layers. I'm just going to leave it in the downloads folder for now. You can see that it's here. And here's the difference. You can see the PSD as opposed to the JPEG. The difference is, if I left this at PNG and saved it, it's going to save the same name of the file. Notice how it didn't ask to overwrite it. That's because it's got a different extension. Here's the difference between those two extensions. I'm going to close this and open Kleki again from Google Classroom. I'm going to select File, Import, and here's where you can see the difference of these two. This is the one that I just saved. It's an image file. It doesn't say PSD on it here, but I'm going to double click it, and when I open it up, do not flatten the image. Open it up as an image here, and you'll see that the layers are still existing here. The other file, if I was to import it, when you open it up, select as image, and you'll notice on the layers, there's only one layer. So if I tried to erase this information over here, it would erase everything. So it's erasing the black and the red and everything else, and I don't want to do that. So again, save that PSD file. When you open it up, it's the only one that it just says image file over here. I'm going to double click it to open it up just so that you can see that the layers are still intact. So now I can go in on the color layer, hit the E for eraser, and now I can erase that red stuff there that's overlapping. A lot of these commands work the same in here as they do on your phone. If you've got a touch screen, to move things around, you can either hold the space bar down, or you can also use 2 fingers to move it around. And you can actually use 2 fingers to move it around and paint it as well. One thing I forgot to do was I want to select this red color again. And the quickest way to do that, make sure I'm on my color layer. If you click this eyedropper tool and click here, it'll pick the same color. So that now when I paint, it's going to paint it with that red color. Notice also, I just noticed something when I was doing that. The eyedropper tool also says Alt. What that means is, when I've got the brush tool selected and I'm painting with the brush tool, if I want to select another color, I can hold the Alt key down on the keyboard and it's going to turn it into the eyedropper. So for instance, if I want that blue color selected, while I'm painting on the red, I can select the blue by holding the Alt key down and clicking on the blue one. So that's another keyboard command. I'm going to make sure I'm on the correct layer. Reduce the brush size to get it down to that size. And then paint those layers. So again, the most important thing here is to make sure that when you're painting the top layer, that you select it before you start painting. Otherwise, you're going to have an issue with painting on the wrong layer. And you can always tell which layer you're on here. You can see just barely. Actually, that's kind of nice. Just notice that preview. If you roll over and pause, it'll show you what's on each layer. And you can see now that there's no color in this layer. There is color there, and there's color there. So once again, I'm going to save this as a PSD. And this time I'm going to change the name of the file. I'm going to call this Kleki because that's the application I'm using. I'm going to do an underscore and put my first initial and last name in here. Then I'm going to put the number 8 as if I were in 8th grade. If you were in 6th or 7th grade, you would put 6 or 7. The letter P and the letter 1. So what this represents is I'm doing a Kleki file. It's A student, which is your first initial and last name. The number 8 represents what grade you're in, and the P1 is period 1. If you do more than one file of these, I would probably also label it AZ hand underscore. So this shows the name of the project. This shows what application I used. First initial, last name, A student, period 1, 8P1, and then save.